Everybody, and welcome to the last session of the week. We are joined by the wonderful Gayle Smerdon. If this is your first session at VID21, my name is Julia Steele, the creator and host. And on this session, we're going to focus on one thing, literally one thing. Gayle Smerdon's going to share some ideas about one thing. She just won't tell you what that one thing is. So hopefully she can clear that up for us. She's a learning and development practitioner, happiest when she's creating simple practical tools and programs, coaching curious people, and writing and speaking about building amazing teams and workplaces by doing one thing and doing it deep. So my question, Gayle, on this Friday afternoon as we head to the weekend, what is one thing?
Hey, Julia. Thank you. Well, one thing's been a bit of a journey for me, really. I don't remember when I started saying do one thing and do it deep at home, but I know that it's something I've said for a long time. I'll be walking around the house and there's lots of stuff going on and I'll be going, just do one thing, just focus. And other times I'll be feeling a little bit unmotivated and I'll just go, just do one thing, just get it going. So I've been saying it for a really, really long time, and I'm not sure how long, but I'm really very sure about a particular experience that was like a one thing epiphany for me. And in the workplace, I was working in an organization, and I can remember the day very clearly. I was walking back to my desk and I'd just been given a project. So I'd come from a meeting and I had this big project that was on. And I got to my desk and I'm sort of just dumbfounded because I'm thinking, I'm not really sure why we're doing this program, why, where it's come from. It just doesn't seem to fit into anything else that we're doing. And I'm just a bit confused about it. And I honestly don't know how I'm actually going to fit it in with everything else I need to do. It's not like I don't have a few projects on already. And I was really sort of frustrated and a bit concerned, and I took a very deep breath and I went, can't we just do one thing? And I had to laugh because I'd just come from another organisation and I'd been walking around that organisation feeling frustrated because nothing was ever happening. And here I am where there's too much going on. Every project that I was doing at this previous role was held up for some reason, or we couldn't really do that right now, or let's just engage a few more people, or no, there's another priority, or we've bumped that off the executive agenda, so we can't get, we can't get that happening yet. There were always reasons why this project couldn't go ahead, and there are some good reasons not to go ahead with things. But after a while, if you just keep getting running into these brick walls, it really shatters your confidence and you start to think that you're not doing very well. And if you're very, very unlucky, you start to fit into this culture of not ever doing anything past planning and meetings. And I realized that one of the things I was walking around in that organization saying was, can we please just do one thing? But it was for a completely different reason. And yeah, so I found that a wee bit amusing. And I was thinking then about, what is this one thing? Why am I saying this all the time? Why is it applicable in so many different situations? And I realized that a saying came to mind, energy follows attention. So wherever your attention's focused, that's where your energy is. And if you have an organization where you can really focus on one thing for them, where you can give some clarity around what's important, it's like focusing a laser, and you can have great cut through and great impact. And it's just so good for your people. But if you're doing something and it's not getting anywhere and all your energy is dispersed, it's very, very frustrating. I think there's a particular part of your stomach for that frustration. I do. So energy follows attention. So when I was thinking about this one thing, people keep asking me, what is one thing? And I'm a little bit embarrassed to say that I find it a bit hard to explain, which is a shame because it's sort of my topic. So I think the best way to start off is to give you an example, and it's really a classic example. You probably know this quite well. The British rowing team hadn't had any success from about 1912, and they decided that, you know, winning probably a good idea. They got this saying that they focused on, which I'm sure most of you know, which was, will it make the boat go faster? And that was sort of their one thing. And it was a question that they asked. They applied it to everything that they did. And if it didn't stand up to the test of will it make the boat go faster, they didn't worry about it. They just got rid of that, or they gave it to someone else to do. So they had this real sense of focus around one thing. And of course, they came over to Australia in 2000 and they won gold, which I'm a little bit ambivalent about. Like, it's great for my story, but, you know, probably would have preferred if Australia won. Just saying. So that's my example of one thing, but there's lots of different types of one things. So let me try and make a definition for you. So one thing is something that's really important that you need to do for your organisation that will make your achieving your vision and your mission and your purpose and your values, it'll just make those things easier. And that's a one thing. Now, one thing, people often misinterpret one thing when I'm talking about it as, oh, we can only do one thing and we're only doing one thing and we're doing it all the time. And it's not that at all. We're not sort of like automatons on a, you know, a belt. What's that belt thing that moves along in a workplace? Yeah, that thing. Yeah, lost the word. We're not that, like, it's not quite that inflexible. We still have other things that we need to do, but if we can harness the one thing, it will release a lot of energy in the organisation. So it's not us just giving up our day jobs. And one thing can happen at really a lot of different levels. So you can have an organisational one thing that can be around lots of different aspects of your organisation, whether it's the culture, the values, the way you're performing. You can have a team one thing where you focus on one thing, where your team is really going to get so much better at how they work together and how they produce. And you can have an individual one thing where you're focused on your performance or on your professional development and just focus on doing one thing. So lots of different levels. I think it's still a little bit vague and I'm going to be banging on about it for a little bit longer yet. So it might be helpful if we just do a little mind game. I hope you're all on for that today. So if you can just think about, and I'd really love you to type some things into the chat box if you don't mind. What are a few things that you've noticed about your organisation or an organisation that you've worked for before that you think they could do better? And just type some into the chat box. I remember that we had a group of people together. We were called the SALT, and that was a self-appointed leadership team. And we'd be solving a lot of one things in our meetings. So that sort of thing. What's a couple of things that you could do better? Yes. Change programs, approval process, yeah. Any others? Oh, record keeping. Yeah, slow down, absolutely. So grab one thing in your mind, and every time I say one thing, just focus on that. Is it better diversity, better gender, better performance, record keeping, or approval, whatever it is? Focus on that one thing so that you can apply it to what we're talking about today. That might just help us a little bit. Now, my one thing that I get a bit about is engagement, staff surveys, culture surveys, whatever you call it, those things. It's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, and I think there's a massive opportunity for us to do one thing around those and do it better. We spend an awful lot of time when we're doing an engagement survey on getting the staff lists right, making sure they're all lined up so that we can get the reports going to the right people. We've got questions that we need to make sure they're fitting the organisation. We've got to do lots and lots of comms. We've got posters to design, strange little icons to put all over the place. We need to have messages popping up at us every second day saying, have you done the survey yet? And that's not at all annoying. So we have all this activity with the tool that we're using, and we're trying to encourage people to participate because usually the rates aren't that good. And then we have the results, the survey. We have to wait a couple of weeks, then we get some results. And then someone comes along and says, all right, here are your results, and here's what you really suck at. Well, they don't just say that, but that's the bit we hear. I don't know anyone who's interested in the top 10 results. I don't know anyone cares how much they've improved. Everyone just wants to get to the bottom 10 and see what they're doing really badly at. It's just us. We can't help it. We're very strange beings. So that's usually where we finish. We might come up with a couple of actions, and then just as we're about to do the next engagement survey, we go, oh my God, we have to put a report in and say what we did about our engagement survey. And it's like, oh yeah, we better make something up about that. And it even happens at an organisational level, or it just sort of gets washed into everything else that's going on. And no one ever comes around and closes the loop and says, we asked you what you thought, you said this mattered, these are all the things that we did, and this is the outcome. And it's because of the survey that we know that and we've done something. Because rather than putting all the effort up front into making lots of comms and bribing people with sausage sizzles and running, winning an iPad, if we actually just did something with the survey, then people would want to participate. So I think there's a massive opportunity for a one thing, because we're focusing all our efforts in the wrong spot. And if we just did one thing from one survey to the next, that we could say, fantastic, let's do that, see how good we've done, I think people would want to participate more, and we'd have a better organisation. It's a win-win. So that's my pet peeve. Sorry to bang on about that for a little while. So one thing, lots of different ways that you can one thing it. You can do one thing after another. You can do one thing first. You can do one thing now. You can do one thing later. My personal favourite is, can you just do this one thing for me quickly? Because that's actually never true. I used to have a manager who would sort of finish having a full day of meetings around 4:30 when I was just about to go home, because I used to come in pretty early. And she'd be coming down the corridor and I could see her, and I'm thinking, oh, I didn't get out of here fast enough today. And she'd be going, Gayle, can you just quickly do this one thing for me? And it was never quick. It was never one thing, and I was going nowhere. So I eventually learned to come in later. So lots of different ways you can do one thing, but the one thing the one way I'm focused on doing one thing at the moment, and you're thinking about your one thing while I'm saying that, remember, is that we want to do it deep, because I think this is another problem. There's a lot of short-term focus in organisations, and we've got lots going on. We're all very distracted. We're all heads down doing our daily work, but we're not doing anything for the long term. So deep. I'm really into deep. I'm going to say that a lot too. Sorry. Now, deep isn't quick and dirty. I hate that expression. It isn't tick the box. I think there are things that you don't need to do deep, but if it is something that you need to, that matters and that you really need to make a change on, then it's better not to do anything than not do it deep, if you know what I mean. It's better to spend the money on a picnic take everyone out for the afternoon. At least you've had a bit of fun and some food and, you know, got together. That works for me. Rather than do a bad job of one thing and then everyone's disappointed because it isn't done well, and that'll never work again. All right, so we're going to go for deep. Everyone ready? The first, I've got 4 principles of deep, and I'm going to go through them now for you. So when you're looking at doing something deep, because not everything has to be deep, some things can just be, let's just do it really quickly. First thing about deep, we've been talking about a little bit, and that's do something that matters. Something that's really important to people that they're going to get behind, because you need that to get them, to get this sort of stuff rolling. And really, if it doesn't matter, why are you doing it? So find something that matters. That's the first thing. So let's go into our little mind experiment again and think about our one thing, and just give a second to think about why that really matters to you. What are the things that make that really matter for you? Happy for you to type any ideas into the chat box along the way as well to share with people. But why do you care about your one thing? Yeah, it slows down progress. Okay, so you've got that in your head, because I'm going to hit you with the second thing now. So the second principle of deep is called, is about time. We need to take some time to do one thing deep. Doesn't happen overnight, but it will happen. Now, if you think about people getting on a plane, you remember getting on a plane? I have vague memories of that. But there are always people who lined up really, really quickly and they wanted to get on first. And there were always people who were hanging around at the back. And unless you take time, you can't get people on the back on board if you're closing the gates too quickly, because everyone learns and everyone engages at a different pace. And the people at the back, they're a little bit reticent and they're waiting to see that this is okay, that this is safe, that they can see some value in it and it's not just another thing that we're doing. And yeah, they need to work out, how does this work for me? How do I fit into this one thing? And if you give them enough time and enough experience around it, then you're much more likely for them to get on board. I had one executive say to me once, I'm not sure why that's not happening, because we talked about that at a town hall 2 months ago. It's like, yeah, it doesn't sort of work just like that. So the third principle of deep is that we need to do things in different ways, because people take on information in different ways. You need to create the ideas and just have people bumping into them everywhere. And it can be lots of different things. So you've probably seen, posters and lanyards, they're pretty popular. Training and development, mentoring, coaching, team things. There's lots and lots of different ways that you can have people engage and experience coming on board with a one thing. Millions of ways. And if you remember the people at the back of the plane, well, doing it different ways is more for people at the front of the plane, because they're really easily distracted. They're getting on board and they're forgetting about everything else now because they're on their journey. And you have to keep making things a little bit new and a little bit novel so that you bring that back to their attention. So having a little bit of time and different ways sort of gets everyone on board. And that's really, different ways reminds me of, you know how you give advice to friends sometimes and you'll say, do you think you could just do this a little bit, or wouldn't it be better if, or how about, and they sort of going, and they're not hearing you. They're not hearing you. And that's okay, because eventually you go, oh, well, that's just them. They're just going to be like that. And then one day, probably about 8 months later, they're running up to you and they've heard a podcast or read a magazine or seen a video somewhere, and they're going, hey, there's this great new thing that I found. And it's like, oh, okay, what is it? And it's like, it's this thing. And I'm going, oh my goodness, you never listen to me. I've been telling you about this thing for months. How come you don't respect me enough? And no, you don't do that, of course, obviously. You're a friend. So you're going, that's very self-aware of you. Well done. Tell me more about this thing, and how are you going to use it, and how can I help? So yeah, people need to bump into things in lots of different ways. They need to take their time to do that. I think if you get the first 3 principles of deep right, you pick something that matters, you take a bit of time to do it and engage people, and you do it in different ways, you're much more likely to get everyone on board. And that means you're much more likely to have an impact. So when you're thinking about engaging people in a one thing, you really need to try to engage them as soon as you possibly can and get them involved in as much of the process as you can. You need that diversity of thinking and ideas and experiences to really make your one thing rich and meaningful to lots of different people, and to get everybody on board. So that's our final one thing. So our 4 principles of deep: something that matters, doing it over time, presenting it in a lot of different ways, and making sure everybody's involved. And if we can do those, we can probably conquer the world. That's my plan. I think doing one thing and doing it deep is really, it's just a no-brainer that it's better for business on so many levels. But more importantly to me is that it's better for our people. Having that sense of clarity and that sense of direction really does amazing things for people's well-being, because we know what happens when it's not there. It helps with engagement, and engagement has so many productivity and just other benefits for people. I think one of the most important things is that it builds trust and connection in an organisation. If a one thing is done well, people feel much more connected, and they trust that the organisation is going to do what it says. It's going to back itself. So it's much, much better for people. Now, our final spooky mind experiment is, let's just take ourselves back to our one thing. If I had like little shimmery music, I could play that for you now, but I don't. So just go back into your minds around your one thing. And I want you to really imagine thinking about why it matters. If this worked well, if you took some time and if you did it in a few different ways and you got everybody on board and people just got better at this one thing, just this much, what would that be like? How would it feel? What would you see? How much difference would it make to your organisation to have just done that one thing and be a little bit better? Are you all having a lovely time in your little mind worlds there? Game changer. Now, I think the wonderful thing about a one thing is that it has lots of consequences around whatever your one thing is. You're doing that better now. But there's lots of unintended consequences as well around connection. And I think if we're looking to shape the future, then we really need to be focusing on one thing and doing it deep. And we probably need to do one thing after another as well. So I'm going to stop banging on about one thing now, because I'd really like to invite everyone into the conversation. And what I'd really like to hear is any questions, just any ideas or any thoughts, but also I'd love to hear about if you've seen great examples of one thing somewhere, because they're out there. We just need to find more of them and spread them around a bit. So has anyone any questions or anything that they'd like to put out there today?
I wanted to know, and sorry if you have covered it when I have been running around, but how do you prioritize what that one thing should be? Like, I always feel like I've got a million things to do. How do you pick that one thing?
So are you talking about for yourself or at a team level or for your organisation? Because they're a little bit different.
Probably myself and my team, leading a team.
Right.
So,
okay.
Yep.
All right. So for yourself, it's probably a little bit trickier for me to dictate that, but I'd be looking at sometimes it doesn't matter. I'd have to say sometimes if you just get started on one thing, then everything else will flow. I think I've probably got a little bit more to say about teams that might be helpful. I think if you're focusing on a team, then you need to make sure that they're involved. And when I'm working with teams around doing a one thing session, we look at lots of different ways to gather things that's on people's minds. So there's lots of different ways to gather all the information, because what we need to do is to get people to choose together, because they need to have enough people who are interested in doing it that you can convince along the way to get involved, sort of to get it kick-started. So we do some exercises around identifying stuff that's on our minds, and then we do some ranking of that and what would we like to do first. And then we have a process for decision making that we agree on at the beginning, who's making the decisions, and this is our process for making a decision. And once we've done that, then we take the one thing and we have a really, really good hard look at it. So we don't just go, all right, what are we going to do now? It's like, no, stop, wait, what are we doing? And we want to pick it up and give it a really, really good shake and say, this is the one thing that we want to do. So usually there's a process with decision making and prioritising that I'd use with the group. For me, I'd probably think about I usually set a daily intention, and then I have other, goals that I'm aware of. And if I'm looking for what's my next one thing to do, then I'm going to be measuring it against those things.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. That's really helpful.
Okay. Anyone got any good examples or any other things to share?
I've got a good one from a project that I ran once.
Cool, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
So this is a while ago now, but I was asked to help rescue a project that was so red it was bleeding and lying like half dead on the floor. And when I went in to look at what they were doing, there was maybe 15 streams of work in this one program that they'd all started at the same time. And they were just not getting any traction because everyone was trying to work on everything. When as soon as we sort of paled it back to what's the most important thing on the project, which was a very clear commercial milestone, as soon as we said, well, that's the one thing. The one thing is to get to that place. What do we need to do it? About 12 of the 15 things fell away as not important, but just not as important as that one thing. And so as soon as we started to shift the program to that one thing, then it was, okay, we've got the plan to get to there, then we can start to do the other one things or start to do the next one thing. And the program shifted. So we went from being about 3 to 4 months late when I got it to actually delivering on the original time. that we said that we would.
Mm. And you have a clear imperative about what it is that you need to do. There's I've forgotten his name now, of course, because I'm trying to think of it. There's a fellow who's written a book called One Thing, and which is, great. I'm also writing a book called One Thing. You think I would have Googled that first, really, didn't you? Anyway, it's a great book, but he has what he calls the focusing question, which is, what's one thing that I need to do right now so that if I did that, it would make everything else unnecessary or easier. So that's a great focusing question. If you're thinking about what's the one thing that you need to do, it's what is it that's going to make something else absolutely unnecessary or just everything easy.
Wayne's asked, is there a limit to the size or scale of the one thing? Is there a duration as a guide?
I think you have to scale as needed, but there is no reason not to have a very big, complex organisation having a one thing. One thing can be a little bit like an umbrella, so it can just be a guiding principle that different things sit underneath. So it doesn't need to be, look, one thing and we're all just working on this. It can actually be like a North Star. So this is our one thing. I'm working with a group at the moment who has a one thing goal in mind, and as part of their strategy, they've selected 3 aspects that they want to work on. And then over the course of the year, with things that are already mapped out, with things that we want to put in place because we need to build some capability or some awareness, it means that we can actually do 3 things, but we're still talking about one thing. So we're giving people that clarity around what matters, but we're offering different ways to do it. So I think with that approach in mind, it means it's quite scalable. And very big organisations like Microsoft use this for huge regional projects and for developing specific things like their leadership programs and things. So they have a very, very specific sort of catchy goal that this is what they're doing, and then everything falls off that. So yeah, I think it is scalable. I think, and I think you'd really need to scope that out to think about what your real time frame might need to be for that, because it depends on how much other stuff you've got on, the maturity of your organisation. Have you got the budget, which is always, an issue. So there's lots of different factors that you take into account when you're thinking about how long it should take. And, you can factor in stuff that's already pre-planned and how's that all going to work in. So, yeah, lots of things that you need to factor in.
I think once you've noticed the power of one thing, it's hard to unnotice it.
Yeah.
Like I found it quite interesting. I was comparing notes with family members who are back in the UK and comparing the COVID response here in Victoria, particularly in Victoria, compared to the UK. And they were asking, what do I think made what happened in Victoria work, and parking political, the politics of it. As soon as they said, this is the one thing, like the roadmap is this, the date is this, the one thing is stay home, for example, the one thing is wear a mask, the one that was all as they were removing restrictions, they were removing one thing, right? Or one restriction, it was removing one thing. And it just, I think it really helped people focus. Whereas when I compare to what happened in the UK, for example, if you were one part of the UK, there was one thing for you actually, and then if you were a certain type of person, there was another one thing for you. When actually, when you added it all up, it wasn't one thing anymore. It was about 15 things that you needed to factor in before you even left.
Yeah, absolutely need those very, very clear messages. Yeah. So when I'm thinking about a one thing campaign for an organisation, there's probably 3 aspects that I'm looking at. One's around, I call it a political campaign, but it's about leadership. So you really need to make sure that you've got your leaders engaged. It's about an engagement campaign. So how do you get your people on board? And it's about a marketing campaign. How do you sell this? How do you get the great messages and information and engage people in it? How do you support them through training and things like that? So yeah, so there's 3 different aspects to me for doing something at that higher level.
Sue said Hawaii's COVID-19 response was beautiful, very, very clear on their one thing, and all the communications are crisp, clear and uncluttered. Yeah, I think, yeah, I've certainly worked in organisations where there hasn't been one thing, and I've had a few clients where there definitely hasn't been one thing. And it's a hard conversation to have. As you say, you've got to be willing to focus on what matters. You've got to give it time to actually get, peel back the layers of the onion, to get to the center of it. Do it in different ways with different people.
Yeah, so one of the things I'm working on at the moment is just looking at some values and things for peeps, and I've been going through all their literature, and there is so much in so many different ways that you start to get what I call the model muddle, and there are so many ideas out there that you really need to pare that all down, like instead of having a capability framework with 178 capabilities, we could probably cut that down a little bit. Instead of having a values and a ways of working and and something else, it's like we could probably combine a couple of things and then roll it up so that we're getting the absolutely essential thing that we all need to be working on right now to make this a better place.
If anyone's got any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourselves. I think as we head...
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Cut you off.
Oh, hi.
Hi, kia ora. So we had we were rolling out a visitor management system in a local council, and this is a very, very old style council, and
I know them well, Sue.
Oh, I managed a team in there, and we had people just tuning up on our floor, and we were in the community development team, so we got all sorts of very passionate people tuning up. Most of them well engaged and just passionate about their subject, but some of them not so nice. But anyway, so I had the great fortune of being put onto the project to put the visitor management system in place, and to do that you had to lock the entire building down. So they'd never ever had this before in their entire history. And as we were going through the messaging, originally we didn't have a clear one thing. We had, staff safety. We had its convenience for visitors. It's much nicer to be hosted properly, and and we had all of this compliance, all of these reasons. And not surprisingly, we did get pushback. And the day that we shifted and we went, cool, what is our thing? We've got to get crystal clear on this, because we've got 2 weeks till we lock this whole building down. It will be chaos if people don't buy in. And we chose staff safety, because the safety of our people had to be number one. And the difference it made, the shift, just in a few days of running, we ran a few roadshow sessions so that we could have open Q&A, because it was such a contentious topic. We wanted to show up for the people, and huge shift, almost overnight, just in that one thing. So very cool.
Yeah. What I really like about what you said there, Sue, was that you weren't trying to sell the system. You weren't saying we're getting a new system or we're getting new processes in. And I find that that's something that quite often happens. We're getting a new learning management system or a new, whatever the system is. And there's that expression that, sell the hole, not the drill. Like, don't sell the fact that it's a new system. It's like, what is it that it's going to give you? So, you were getting that right from the beginning. It's just you needed to pick one. So that's great.
I've also been on a few projects, just as you were talking, Sue, about where the one thing is actually shielding another one thing. So a couple of projects, it's like, oh, we need a story to tell people. but the one thing behind that story was the one thing that everyone could see, but people weren't, the leadership team at the time weren't necessarily as transparent as they should be. So how do you sort of navigate that, where there is a one thing, but that one thing's quite brutal, like we've got to make people redundant, or we've got to save money, or we've got to revolutionize a product, or we've got to grow, or how do you do that one? The negative one thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, look, that's really tough. And I'd like to say that every time you did it and you engaged people and you were open and transparent, that all worked out, but that's not true. Sometimes you have to be time the message that you're giving people, but being dishonest or holding things back, it's just going to bite you. So and look, the people at the back of the bus, they're always going to be a little bit tricky to deal with. There's always going to be people who are saying no, but there are enough examples out there of where this is handled quite well, even with very, very difficult things, that there's sort of some hope. One architectural firm that was having some issues during the COVID lockdown and weren't really sure what they were going to do, or if they were going to still remain viable. And they had to have that discussion with their organisation, and that's just what they did. They said, we need to come up with ways to save some money. And of course, the thing is that the people on the ground know how to make that happen. Like, they could see that we've got these couple of different processes happening and they're sort of the same thing. We could just not do that anymore. Or we could all just work 0.8 and would that get us to it? So it doesn't work everywhere, and I'm sort of aware of that, but in an ideal world, it would be best if you could be that transparent and help people figure out the problem. Because if you treat people like, people or adults, that's what you're going to get. If you treat them like children and hide things from them, that's what you're going to get.
I couldn't agree more. Gayle, if people want to find you, I know you write prolifically on LinkedIn and other places. Where should people find you?
Yeah, sure. So yes, I'm always banging on about this on LinkedIn, or it's gaylesmerdon.com. You can check out my website. There are a couple of white papers there. There's a white paper there about One Thing organisation. There's also another one called I Develop, which is about professional development and your one thing. And next week I'm posting one as well on Teams, One Thing for Teams. So yeah, so they're all just available for download, and you can check out other stuff that I do as well.